Well, good afternoon if you are in the eastern part of North America or South America. Bonsoir, guten Abend, buonasera if you are in Switzerland or countries near there. Good overnight in the middle of Asia, parts of Africa, and so on. And good morning if you are further out in the Pacific. It is Friday, and therefore it is time for Fred Plotkin on Fridays, in which I have guests who inspire me. I need to tell you about today's guest, Gianandrea Noseda, that not only does he inspire me, but we happen to be very close friends, and we've been close friends for nearly 20 years. So therefore, the tone of this conversation, we're not going to pretend that we're sort of a formal interview here. It's not. It's a conversation between two very good friends. Gianandrea is one of the world's leading conductors. I think it's fair to leave it at that. I'm not going to say anything else about you, Gianandrea. You're one of the world's leading conductors. How about that?
I don't know. I should not say that. I mean, I consider myself a musician, privileged enough to work with great institutions, and that gives me a lot of pleasure, a lot of responsibility, and the possibility also to meet a lot of people. And through this activity as a musician, we met each other. So I don't know if I'm one of the leading, but I'm happy the music I'm doing with all the artists I'm working with.
Well, I'm an expert, and therefore I can say you're one of the world's leading conductors, and I'm not saying that as your friend. But I do want to point out we have known each other, I figured out, nearly 20 years, almost. And when we met, and I had you join me at my class at New York University, you were my very first guest. I didn't really know you then. We had to teach the audience how to pronounce your name. They did not know how to say Gianandrea Noseda. Many said Noseda, things like that. They knew nothing about you. And I said that you have the same first name as Gianandrea Gavazzeni, the great conductor, and that Noseda is a very old traditional Milanese name, and that you are from the area just outside of central Milan called Sesto San Giovanni, and therefore you grew up in this environment of this great musical city that is Milan. But your journey actually took you to other unexpected places that marked you out as a little different in your preparation from many other conductors and musicians, Italians at least, in that you spent significant time early on in St. Petersburg, Russia. Would you talk about that?
The opportunity came out after a master class I attended as a young professional. That this master class was given by Maestro Valery Gergiev in Italy, in Siena, Accademia Chigiana di Siena, a very prestigious academy, summer academy in Italy. And since then, we kept in touch with Maestro Gergiev. That happened in the summer, was August 1993. And since then, when Maestro Gergiev came to Italy, either to conduct La Scala or Santa Cecilia, if possible, I went to attend rehearsals and to attend performances. And after a couple of years, he invited me to conduct a production of Nozze di Figaro in St. Petersburg. But before that, in a tour with the Mariinsky Orchestra in Italy in October 1996, he gave me the possibility to do two concerts with his orchestra, one in Carpi and one in Milano, with a very strange, not strange, but challenging program for a young conductor, because it was really in the core of the Mariinsky institution, because it was La Forza del Destino Sinfonia, that the first version was commissioned by the Teatro Reale, the Imperial Theater in St. Petersburg, and was Firebird, the suite from the Stravinsky Firebird, and the second half was Tchaikovsky Pathétique. So it was really challenging for an Italian young conductor to approach this orchestra. But apparently, that was the story Valery told me much later. The orchestra was very impressed And that's why in December, so 2 months later, in December 1996, I received a phone call from Maestro Gergiev, and that was like to receive a phone call from Napoleone, because I didn't expect that that telephone call. Can you imagine? Oh, I'm Valery. He just invited me to conduct Nozze di Figaro. The performance was the 10th of February 1997, so I went to St. Petersburg in mid-January. I had the opportunity to work in that first performance I did at the Mariinsky with the young Anna Netrebko singing Susanna. That was our first meeting. So that is how it started. And after that Nozze di Figaro, Maestro Gergiev invited me in that night festival in June 1997 to conduct a concert performance of Rigoletto. And I had Anna Netrebko singing Geda. And after that, I got the invitation. I was invited to become a principal guest conductor of the Mariinsky. I took the position in October 1997. So everything started like that. And since that October, I went regularly there for almost a decade, almost 10 years, 3 months a year, in 3 chunks, 1 month, 1 month, 1 month, in a different period of the year. That was my collection.
Let me ask a basic question that I would ask to many conductors. What's it like to conduct an orchestra when you do not speak their language? I know you now have learned Russian, but at the time, how do you communicate what you want musically? I know some of them would speak English or Italian, but I know many conductors of one country who meet orchestras in other countries, and I always wonder how they communicate.
Because due to the fact that I conducted that program in our first concert, not much to be said, but to rehearse, I used, because they asked me to use the Italian names that in music are very, so, ritenuto, più forte, meno forte, un poco sostenuto. So just talking with the basic Italian musical language was easy to rehearse. When I went to St. Petersburg, I had to deal with singers to do Nozze di Figaro. We decided that the best common language, that doesn't mean was fantastic spoken language, but the best one was English. So I rehearsed in English, but I realized immediately that if I would have continued to go there, and that happened later on, I had to learn Russian. And after that, it took a little bit, it took a while, but already 1.5 years later, I was able to lead rehearsals in Russian.
You know, it's interesting. I am 8 years older than you are. And when I came to Italy to work and study, I was a teenager. And I wanted to learn Italian for all the obvious reasons, but also because when I started, the common language in opera, whether you were working in Hamburg or Buenos Aires or Milan or New York, was Italian, not English.
Precisely.
And therefore, we all, wherever we came from, had to speak fluent Italian. And just in a few short years, it migrated to English as the common language. And that's an unusual thing because opera is an Italian art form initially, although it's come to other things. It leads me to a question for you, that there are many, many, many outstanding conductors from Italy. There always have been. Right now, I think there are many wonderful ones who are in front of orchestras all over the world. Many Italian conductors have had what I think is a problem, that they're expected to represent the Italian repertory. Gergiev is famous for conducting the Russian repertory, but he does other things. German conductors, Austrians such as Karajan, Kleiber, conduct the German repertory, but they also conduct other things. Leonard Bernstein, an American, conducted many, many things. There are some Italians, Toscanini, Claudio Abbado, Fabio Luisi, you, who are not limited to the Italian repertoire. I'm not saying that it's bad to be limited, but there are certain artists who very early on showed an affinity, showed an ability beyond the Italian repertoire, so that Chailly was conducting all kinds of things in Luisi that were German and Northern European. And Abbado, who I studied with and I love, conducted everything beautifully, whether it was Mozart or Berg, everything. Russians, Wagner, you name it, he conducted it beautifully. And you do the same, and you're expanding in that. And I want to talk to you more about that later. But did anyone ever say to you that they expected you to stick to Italian repertoire?
Not really, because let's say I'm a little bit unusual in the way I started to conduct, because at the beginning, usually the Italian conductor is seen, or we have been seen, as an operatic conductor, especially for Italian repertoire, some French, but Italian repertoire. When I started with the symphonic repertoire, because the first concerts I conducted at the time were with the Orchestra Verdi di Milano, so orchestra that basically does symphonic repertory. And my first two programs were one Russian with Prokofiev, a suite from Romeo and Juliet and Symphony No. 5, and the second one was Liszt Faust Symphony, the Faust Symphony by Liszt. So nothing Italian at all. And my first opera, that I consider my first opera, is really probably the real one, was Nozze di Figaro at the Mariinsky. Before, that's why I didn't consider at the beginning myself an operatic conductor. If you are not this sort of imprinting, you can do whatever you like. The fact that I started to make opera in St. Petersburg at the Mariinsky Theater gave me the possibility to do Italian repertoire, but also to do Russian repertoire, also to do Le Conte of Man, also to do the Fliegende Holländer, Flying Dutchman, a big variety. So even in the opera, I was not, with la stigmatized as an Italian conductor. I mean, Italian repertoire conductor. When I did my debut at the Met was War and Peace, Prokofiev.
Prokofiev, yeah.
Yeah. So that's why probably. And after that, we will talk later, but getting the position of chief conductor with the BBC Philharmonic in Manchester, doing a lot of repertoire, symphonic repertoire, basically. So that gave me the possibility to be considered a conductor, a musician, without this kind of underlining, Italian or French or specialized. And also the German repertoire, it comes because in my previous life, I was a acceptable pianist. So, and my butter and bread were starting from Bach, Mozart, Beethoven, Schumann, Brahms. I was not feeding myself with Chopin, although I loved deeply Chopin, or even Russian repertoire, Rachmaninoff. So it was basically the big Germanic, so Clavecin bien tempéré, sonate Beethoven, Brahms, intermezzi, sonate, Schumann, the same. So when I translated all this with the orchestra, very early age, I already started to conduct Brahms symphony, Beethoven symphonies. I started with Schumann symphonies. So that is why I consider myself a little bit unorthodox or not usual.
You know, in thinking about this topic, I'll name two conductors, one of them dead, the other one not dead. Nello Santi, who I knew very well, was kind of like a big fat archive of Italian music and was very proud, and I'm not criticizing him here, to basically be the cassaforte, the safe, the ocean liner, that he was a big man that contained all of this Italian repertory. And people looked to him for Italian style and the secrets of performing Italian repertory well. So that was okay. I never had a problem with that with him. But then I was thinking about Riccardo Muti. And Riccardo Muti famously can conduct anything he wants, and he does, but he's seen as sort of the archive of Italian music. And I think it's something that he likes and appreciates. And it has not really constrained him from doing other things. But when I talk to conductors, and especially when I talk to singers, they all say that they look to Muti for authoritative information on Italian music. I know that you are a very passionate supporter of Italian music, and it's a big part of who you are and what you do. If you can make such a generalization, what characterizes Italian opera and Italian repertory in terms of performance style? I don't mean what the composers wanted, but how it's performed.
Oh, that is a very intriguing question. And I have, first of all, to say that I adore both conductors mentioned by you from different reasons, because you explained perfectly. Let's say, underline what specifically is important for Italian repertoire. I don't know, being Italian, because it's like respirare, breathing, or eating. I don't even think to do anything strange. What I can say is, in Italian music, you don't have to be anxious, but you have to be urgent. The way also we talk, they say anxiety is always bad. When you don't have the time to breathe, and the singers cannot sing, and the music doesn't have this kind of way of express itself. But if you just indulge too much in something that, for instance, is very important in other kinds of repertoire, the Italian music loses the fire that even in the soft moments should always be underneath. It's like la brace under the fire. It's always hot.
La brace is a grill, just for our non-cooking friends.
Yeah,
it's a grill with the coals underneath, so the heat always has to be underneath, even if it's not a fire. Yes.
Thank you for that, Fred. And that's why even when we have this kind of melodious and sensuous music, you should never lose the sense of camminare, moving on, without rushing, but moving on. What is next? What is next? Where are leading this phrase? And the other thing is to shape in a certain way the phrase, the musical phrase. That goes also with our language. We always have this kind of cantilena. And so just to preserve, to look for this even in a melodic line, in a tune. So I think those are the characteristics more that comes to my mind. Probably being Italian, I cannot explain better, but when I conduct Verdi, for instance, what is important more than melodic tune, more than the beauty of the music, is the parola scenica. Parola scenica, just the parola that in itself drives the drama.
The scenic word. That doesn't quite translate in English, but I call it an imperative that Verdi has.
Yeah.
I was going to ask you actually about a friend of Verdi, Donizetti, that what you were talking about the movement of the music is something that I find a lot in Donizetti, because it could be very languid, and then suddenly it's kind of like I can feel my foot tapping, as it's the character that her mind, her heart, something is starting to speed up. And it could either be tragedy like Lucia, it could be Gioia, where suddenly her heart is coming back or something is getting better. And that particular pacing in Donizetti, I love. He's criticized for being that he wrote too many operas and so on. I think that he wrote so many masterpieces, and we look at some of them, but there are so many more Donizettis that we could look at, and the music is brilliant. It's
absolutely. I cannot agree more. I think if Verdi is the giant we consider today, is because it took from Donizetti. And you know, the invettiva di Edgardo when it comes back, maledetto, maledetto, sia all'istante, that could have been written by Verdi. Verdi made it more consistent. With Verdi, you never have the feeling that he doesn't have any more carbon to put in the fireplace. You think, wow, now the temperature, oh, what a drama, great, ooh, almost unbearable. And you know what? Verdi has it more, even more. So how to judge, how to balance that, how to shape, that is just what intrigues me most when I do Verdi. But even with Puccini in different way. If you make Puccini too slow, it becomes too melancholic, too over-egged, too over-sugared, and is not over-sugared, the music by Puccini. There is a big drama driving into the story and through the story. And if you keep that, even if you have a very slow tempo, but just the fact that you sustain that tempo, you keep it going, very slow, like a march funèbre, Trauer March, or Funeral March. And you are going to really, to keep that, that sometimes creates a sense of suspension where the time doesn't exist anymore. And you are just in this oasis. And after that, the drama starts again. So this kind of, the momentum in the Italian opera, if you miss it in all the repertoire, but with the Italian opera, either becomes too fire and blood, or either becomes too the coffee with too much sugar, or the zabayon with too much marsala.
Or boring. Boring.
Or boring.
Because it's just a matter of some conductors are just timekeepers. And that's not enough. I believe, and you can agree or disagree, that the conductor is part of the storytelling in an opera, and
Absolutely.
just as much as the stage director and the singers. I've had more than a couple of fine conductors say to me that they find Puccini much harder to conduct than some of the other Italians. And that one of them even said to me, I won't name him, but he's a very famous conductor, that for him, some of the hardest music to conduct is the first act of La Bohème.
I can absolutely subscribe. Whoever is the conductor, I will be.
Why is that?
Let's not think now about the first act of La Bohème, but we go back to that. With Puccini, what I find extremely difficult is the fact that in every bar, practically, you have an indication, a nuance, or ritenuto, or move on, or even more ritenuto, sostenuto. And sometimes if you literally try to do everything in that moment, the music doesn't flow. That way to write by Puccini reminds me the heartbeat. The heartbeat is never fixed. It depends if you just climb the stairs, or if you get an emotion, if you read a letter that gives you joy, and there is this, but in a way, it doesn't go from 0 to 100, but there is a progression when it comes back. So that is to find the natural way of expression, respecting all the marks by Puccini, but giving the impression that is absolutely natural, cannot be differently than that. With La Bohème, first act is so puntillistic at the beginning because it's very conversante, with a lot of conversation, there are not arias. Even when comes Schaunard telling the story of the Pappagallo, the parrot, is not a real aria. So the risk is just to make the audience to wait the love duet, the two arias and the love duet at the end. So just to shape that and to be very consistent, how to balance correctly the change of tempos, the relationship between tempo. And Puccini, when he writes metronomic marks, and he writes, for instance, 126, immediately after writes, I give you an example, 92. 92 is absolutely 2/3 of 126. So you should know exactly how to balance and to mathematically to do that, but shouldn't sound mathematic, shouldn't sound arithmetic, should sound like a wave of sound. That is why Puccini is difficult, because either is to stop and go, or either is too cold, to equal, and to find this natural, to find the organic way that creates a lot of headaches. Even to me, I'm talking to me, not to the other conductors, so to me. So and I love Puccini.
I just thought of something that came back to me about La Bohème. You, for a period, were the music director of the Teatro Regio in Torino and brought many, many successes to that theater. And because we're friends, I would often come to Torino and see performances and eat chocolate and drink coffee. And you did a very fine production of La Bohème, and I should say, and Puccini's La Bohème premiered in Torino. So there's a long heritage there. I certainly respect that as an opera, and I think that I have been to too many performances, and I've worked on too many productions of La Bohème. I worked on the original Zeffirelli at the Met, and that was a marvelous experience, but I just have had too much Bohème. The production that was done in Torino, and I forget the name of the director, but it was an excellent production, updated the opera, and I don't necessarily love updates, but it was set in the periphery of a European city. And there were the visible aspects of that. It was sort of anonymous. It's not like an American suburb that might be pretty. It was functional, and poorer people lived there, and there was a little bar, and it was winter, and there was a pharmacy and a bench and not too much else. And I found that very, very persuasive, but I also found, and I say this now as a professional and not as your friend, that your conducting responded to that production and made it very alive for me in a way that a lot of bohèmes have not been lately. And I don't even remember the cast, frankly, but I remember that the production and your conducting made it feel like I was watching a contemporary drama. And I really cared about the characters. And your music was not, your music making was not overly sweet as you described it. Often some of those arias and duets are just too sugary. And this had almost a neo-realism about it. And I really felt for the characters. And so if you would just talk to us about that production and the work and the ideas that went into it, because number one, who directed? I don't remember the stage director.
The director is Alex Ollier.
Yes.
This is one of the two members of La Fura del Vals. And the cast was made by established singers, but not necessarily stars. So, but we had very, very good singers. So Irina Lungo, Berrugi, right. Cavalletti, Massimo Cavalletti. So, you know what led me in my first conversation with Alex Ollier when we decided to do that new production was the fact that I underline my conception of La Bohème. La Bohème has been premiered in 1896, so at the end of the 19th century. But for me, is not the last chapter of the late Romanticism, but is the first or the prologue of the first chapter of the 20th century music. While the Manon Lescaut, I made Manon Lescaut to belonging to the end of the late Romanticism. And from La Bohème, I consider, okay, here starts the 20th century musically. In that way, I think the drama becomes more real. When you just talked about neo-realism, it's what we try to do. And also conducting, when Mimi in the production died, I was really taken emotionally. And I didn't make Mimì to die immediately after Sono andati fingevo di dormire, because there is still 15 minutes of music going. So, and you cannot make Mimì dying there. And also during that production, during that period, I had the possibility to go to the Biblioteca della Pinacoteca di Brera in Milano, where there is the manuscript of La Bohème, really manuscript, not facsimile, manuscript by Puccini. I was rehearsing La Bohème for that production, and I saw the quick way that Puccini wrote, composed the music, because very few bars in one page and not very clear. You could see the fast, the speed he was composing, how the fluency of the inspirational part, no? And most important, at the end, and in the last pages, he just made a draft with the skull and two bones like that.
Really?
And he wrote, "Here, Mimì dies." And that changed my perception, because usually it's made too early. And still, and it's incredible because he made the draft himself. I was shocked. I was shocked. And other things that different notes, probably in different revisions, he changed, but I didn't change the note according with that manuscript. But for me, it was very inspiring to see what was the first inspiration, the first idea. So also with that idea, with that experience I got from looking the pages that 1895 were white, 1896 were written by Puccini, gave me this sense of drama, of modern drama, of 20th century drama. That's why I also agree with you. Sometimes I think that the production was good, was well sung despite the conductor. But in that production, I think we did all a good job.
As you know, I often coach singers in certain roles. And there are a few that I'm very good at. One of them is Lohengrin, but another one is Schaunard in La Bohème, because Schaunard is the forgotten character in my view, because we have Mimì and Musetta, they're very prominent women. We have Rodolfo and Marcello, who are tormented, complicated lovers and creative artists and so on. We have Colline, who is the philosopher. But who is Schaunard? He's not given that much definition. So I've studied and thought about Schaunard, and I've decided that, number one, he is the most successful with the women of all. He's charming. He must have something about him. He's able to make enough money to bring home food for the other roommates. He has something going on, but he lives in a lighthearted way. So I think it's just a stroke of genius that Puccini and his librettists made Schaunard be the one who discovers that Mimì is dead, not anyone else. And when I ask young baritones, why does he discover her, they usually have no idea. And then we help build the whole backstory of this character based on Puccini's and his librettist decision that it's Schaunard who sees the skull and the crossbones, in effect. And then he doesn't know what to do for a moment. He's never seen death. He's never written or philosophized about death. He's never thought about it in the abstract, apparently. He's just out there being a bohemian with the girls and the making music. I think he's a musician.
Musician, let's say, yeah.
And so we know about musicians. And he always brings home food. And he dances. He does all of that. He is the most bohemian of them all. And but has the least character development. What did you say?
He has the joie de vivre, la gioia della vita.
Yeah. And therefore, Gianandrea, I don't know the answer, but do you have any idea why Puccini and the librettist made Schaunard discover Mimi's death? Or is it just brilliant drama making?
I think everybody of the characters talking about the four boys, the four young men, everybody is very focused in succeed in what they are doing. They are not, but they really write Il Castor for the magazine, or the other one just painting, trying to find someone to expose, to make an exposition, or Colleen, that all in the opera is really giving pearls of wisdom to everybody. But the most sincere moment when he's just given the zimarra to make some money.
Yeah.
The coach. And Schaunard is the one that is more aware of the situation of the four friends. He knows that if you just dream, you don't have anything to eat. So he goes and he makes sing in the parrot all the story, and after that, even in the Café Momus, is the one that tries to get the attention, not to distract between Musetta and Marcello when they start to battibecco, to argue, no, in a very nice way. I think being a musician and being so alert and suggesting also the dance in the last act, when they made all Rigodon, all the story of Quadriglia, the sensitiveness, the attention, the eye he has to find out, oh, now this is needed. Now I should do that. And the only moment when he is compassion, he feels a lot of compassion for Mimi, is not even able to leave Mimi. A certain point is Colleen, let them alone, go away. Yeah. So he understood, first of all, that was something serious. Everybody knew Mimi was sick, but he understood he didn't want to leave her. After the invitation, leave them alone. Maybe it's the last meeting, or leave them alone. So the sensitiveness of Schaunard, probably being a musician.
It's interesting, that perspective, which I admire. I didn't think of it, because when I think of that moment where Colline says, let them be, I don't think of Schaunard being sensitive, although I think you're right now that you'd say it. But he's innocent, or he's just not, he's ingenuous more than innocent. And he just doesn't quite know that this is the time to leave this couple alone.
That is probably the other coin of the other face of the coin. But I like to think that he's there, a little bit apart, but in case it's needed, I'm here. I don't want to disturb, but okay, Colleen, okay, go away, let them alone. I like to think that this one who has the joie de vivre, who is the one that always change the mood of the others, even after the duet at the beginning of the fourth act between Rodolfo and Marcello, immediately he finds the way to wake them up until the moment where there is this boom. C'è Mimì che mi segue, che sta male, là sulle scale, più non si resta. After that moment, the music is completely a different story. It's like the tam-tam at the end of Pathétique. There is the music before and there is the coda after. But that makes a border prima e dopo, before e after. And that when this colpo, full orchestra, so violent, stops the dance of the four friends, there the opera starts a different pace, but should not be immediately too slow, because it's not dead yet. So little by little, we have to, immediately after that, the idea of the Bohemian, the life of the Bohemian is completely different. They never faced something so cruel, so dramatic until that moment. After 20 years, I strongly believe that Michele and Giorgetta are Marcello and Musetta. They got married. I don't know, this is my conviction. Still in Paris, they get together. They have a very difficult life. I don't know, but, and is quoted, "È la storia di Mimi," is quoted by Puccini, by the two lovers
in Il Tabarro.
in Tabarro. And
so
I don't know.
This is part of why I love you. I have a different opinion.
but that's why I love you.
My opinion is they are Ruggiero and Magda in La Rondine.
Può essere.
Why
not?
I've always sort of functioned on that this is what those characters would be 20 years later. They're the survivors. I believe La Rondine is the 1860s, whereas La Bohème is the 1830s. So that would be right at the time was, okay, now I'm going to go back to Il Tabato and look at it your way. But I want listeners to understand something, that when you go to an opera and you see a production and a performance, those of us who work in this art form spend a great deal of time thinking about details that you may not see. The fact that we just analyzed one of the minor characters in La Bohème for about 10 minutes and brought all kinds of things out of him and then found different routes into other Puccini operas. This is how you can have a lifetime working in opera, and it's not enough. And so you have to be economical with your time. And that's why it's interesting that someone like Carlos Kleiber limited his repertoire, but did everything to a complete degree and lived and relived La Traviata and Rosenkavalier and certain few works, whereas other people like James Levine conduct a vast range of repertoire and very well, but with a different approach. So you used a word about 10 minutes ago that I want to get back to, because you said it in English, but you thought it in Italian. And it's a word that I try to explain to people who don't speak Italian, and they don't get it. So I think I want to go through this word with you. In Italian, it's emozionato. And in English, we might say moved with emotion. And in Italian, when someone is emozionato or commosso, which is very moved, I find that in Italian society, that when someone is emozionato, people applaud that and are very taken with it. And this is not just in opera. So for example, if the Italian soccer team, football team, plays really well and someone scores a goal, he becomes emozionato and everyone goes to help him. You see people on TV watching the news or watching something tragic, or hearing the great singer Mina, a popular singer, sing in a very moving way, and they're emozionati. And this concept to British writers 100 years ago was very exaggerated and very kind of cheap and not genuine and not deep. I find the experience very deep, but I know that sometimes Italians who want to do something in sports and whatever, not just music, become so emozionato that they can't do it. And would you talk about that sensation of what's behind that word to an Italian in a way that non-Italians may understand it better?
L'emozione o essere emozionato ha diversi the word I was already speaking in Italian, so
you were emozionato.
The word emozionato embraces different ranges. You can be emozionato because your soccer team, as you said, plays very well, and one of the soccer player makes a fantastic goal, and that emozione is an explosion. Emozionato, you have an explosion of joy, but it's not just euphoric joy, but brings also tears in your eyes. The same when you see an opera and you see for the 100th times that Violetta dies, Traviata, emozionato means commosso, means you want to help. you would like to help, if you have 0.1% possibility to rescue or to help Violetta, and that night don't let her die, you will do it. That is emozionato. And sometimes emozionato has very dry eyes, so no tears, but sometimes with tears when you laugh, because you are touched inside. So emozionato is something that is deep inside you, is something that touches you deeply inside, can be hugely dramatic, can be hugely happy, it can be, yeah. Probably, if you are emozionato, you are more willing to take care of things, to care about things, about people, to be compassionate. Is very close to what the Latin said pietas, which is not pity, is all this. So, wow, you gave me a very difficult, you asked me a very difficult question because to explain in not my burn language what means emozionato, but is that, I of course, and you have to control your emozione when you conduct, because if you are overwhelmed, over emozionato, you have to stop conducting, and I should still control what I'm doing. I cannot be cold, because if I'm cold, I try to be detached, I'm not able to narrate the story, to make the emotion to carry to the audience, and to establish this exchange of feelings of the emotion that goes back and forward from pit, stage, audience. The audience is not a passive part of a performance. The audience helps the performance. I will always write all the characters, orchestra, chorus of this opera house, and audience. I will write in there because it's important. The audience is a very important part of the performance.
Well, I certainly agree with you on that. And I know, and you know, and I think most of our listeners know, that audiences are very different in different parts of the world, even different parts of Europe. And I think that this concept of emozionato, which works better as a word than emotional, is that in certain societies, when those feelings come, people feel embarrassed. Whereas when they come to Italians, they embrace those feelings and they go with them. And I'm not saying one or the other is bad, but in certain societies that are more socially restrained, if they feel those things, they keep them within. So I was talking about the British, I'll go back to them. I find the British to be very sentimental, which is a very nice thing. That's not a criticism at all. But what the Italians would call emozionato, the British would call sentimentale, sentimental. And there's a slight linguistic difference, but I think it's the way they react to their emotions. Americans are too diverse to give one characterization. We're just loud and we applaud very quickly. But I've seen Japanese people, for example, who are very knowledgeable about the art forms, keep their emotions in, whereas Koreans somehow let their emotions out a little more. They're very Italian that way. And you can't generalize, but I will say that some of the best audiences I know anywhere happen to be in Barcelona. And I know you've worked somewhat in Spain. But to me, the best combination of knowledge, emozione, appreciation of the quality of music making, that often happens in Barcelona. And I've seen conductors and singers be even better in Barcelona than in other places because of the element of the audience. You don't have to comment on that, but I think we're talking about this concept of emotion and what we bring, because certain societies repress that or have us channel our emotion in different ways. And I have read a lot of dramatic commentary and criticism, in the good sense criticism, from British and English language writers who just seem to miss that emozione part in the Italian repertoire and life. And similarly, and you don't have to comment, certain British stage directors who take on opera and they direct to the text rather than to the music. And therefore, they identify the feelings in the text and don't hear the feelings in the music. If you want to comment, go ahead. Or if not, I have plenty of other things to talk to you about.
No, no. This is, of course, I respect your point of view, and in a way, I'm on board with you. The thing about the not to be embarrassed about the personal emotion, but to be emozionato. In Italian, I always make a reference of the vecchio gentiluomo italiano, old Italian gentleman. And is a category that little by little is disappearing little by little. But you know, the old Italian gentleman was that kind of very proud figure, very respectful and very respected. He didn't have any fear to cry if something came that brought tears to their eyes. They were not embarrassed or they were not ashamed. And that didn't take anything away from the respect or the pride they had. This kind of, the best example is the 1 hour conversation vis-a-vis I had with Maestro Carlo Maria Giulini. That for me was the explanation what means being a great man. I'm not talking about myself, about Carlo Maria Giulini. I will never get to these heights. And to see in his eyes, talking about the first pages of Jupiter by Mozart in a fantastic facsimile, he just turning the pages and telling me, this is music that we can only dare to touch with very clean hands. He had this kind of, not tears coming down, but very lucid eyes. Yeah, I understood that, okay, that means greatness.
I only had the opportunity to work with Julie once about 40 years ago on a production of Falstaff. And he with Renato Brusson, and he was so inspiring, and he was in every way the gentleman, but there was no affectation about it. He just was sincere, and he was not the most extroverted person. There was a quiet elegance about him, but he certainly made you feel with his music making. I will say that, to my shame, that there are certain composers I don't love as much as others. And one of the hardest composers for me, I apologize, is Brahms. And the only conductor who has opened my eyes to Brahms was Giulini. And before that, I really just didn't understand Brahms. And he very kindly sat down with the Second Symphony once with the score with me and went through it and tried to explain where the genius was. But he said, the genius is not important. What's important is making the music. And this is how I tried to do it, he told me. And, you know, those memories are incredibly precious, because there we were working on Falstaff, and he dedicated an hour to me to go through the Brahms Symphony No. 2. So you're talking about certain kinds of Italian men of a certain style. Before we move on to one of the many other things I want to talk to you about, one of my very favorite films is by Vittorio De Sica, and it's called Umberto D. And Umberto D is so tragic. And part of it is about an Italian man attempting, against very long challenges and odds, to maintain his dignity and composure. And I just tell people to go watch Umberto D to understand a lot about the Italian character. But Gianandrea, we met because you were conducting at the Met. We've seen each other all over the world, thank goodness. And I have traveled to where you perform. And so I get to see the world. Thank you very much. But one of your very important roles now is that you are the music director of the National Symphony of Washington, D.C. And on these programs, I tend not to talk about COVID and about the pandemic and so on. But I do want to talk to you a little bit about having been away from the orchestra because of that, and then putting a mask on and getting shots and coming to Washington and working with them. Talk about that experience.
We have been away from 1 year, exactly 1 year, since my last concert in 2020. And my first concert just streamed with no audience in March. So 12 months. But what I really tried to do during this time, I tried to keep the contact alive with every month I wrote a few lines, old Italian way, of course, through email, but just writing and asking the people, the executive director, to share this message. So I wrote at least 6 or 7 of these things. I participated to 3 or 4 Zoom meeting. I also got the possibility to through Zoom to technology to see the donors, and each month, a couple of times talking with the planning of the artistic, finding the plan B. We arrived to the plan Z because we always change the plans. But when I went back, what I rediscovered was the love I have for my musicians. Maybe it's a little bit too arrogant to say my musicians. They are perfect, great musicians, but the musicians, which ones I make music more often with. And what I appreciated mostly was the fact that they were very eager. They were desperate to get back together and play. But most important, they kept themselves in shape. That means they practiced. That means they played. That means they care. Emozione. They care about what they are doing. And it's incredible. I tell you one small thing. I used this time to read a lot of books and to learn a lot of scores. Also scores that were waiting here in my library for much too long. And when I was approaching learning these scores, looking the line of the cello was automatic. I saw the faces of my players in Washington. And the same, if there is a line of the oboe, was Nick, was the principal oboe, or the line of the second, or everybody. So it was automatic. I was not making an effort to remind them. It was, like if the next week I had to go to them and to make music and to rehearse that piece. So that has been, after 1 year, we recorded 4 concerts. Now I went back at the end of May. We did 2 recorded concerts as well, but we had 250 people in the concert hall at the Kennedy Center. And that was a completely different atmosphere, even for the players, because it's undeniable. When you play and there is no one in the audience, you miss the reason why you are playing. You can enjoy just being at home, or you can play listening a recording. I point out after a general rehearsal in one of the recording concerts without audience back in March, I told, dearest artists, don't forget that we are players, but also we are our audience. So you play for your colleague, but you are colleague of him or her. So we play for ourselves because we are the performers and the audience in the same time. So let's care about the music, about each other. And that was the key point, because they really were performing. And was devastating when just I turned and there were just cameras and not audience. But now I strongly believe that our reunion will be more and more frequent to hopefully to go back to a normality that we will see each other very often.
I just sort of a question that I've never asked in Italian before. There's a little town that I live in Italy, and there's a wonderful baker, and he is from Puglia, and his wife, wonderful wife, is from Puglia as well. And they love music, and she especially, and she knows a great deal about classical music, and she listens to the rye, and she says that the lievito, the yeast, works better when I play opera in the bakery. And she refers to what you just call the artist, the musician. She calls them I professori d'orchestra, the professors of the orchestra. What does that term mean? It's an unusual term.
Yeah. It's the way we call the professori d'orchestra, someone who is in the orchestra, because in Italy, when someone meet with someone else and you have the impression that the other one, or she or he, doesn't matter, is sort of university or laureato, everybody's dottore.
Yeah.
Mi scusi, dottore. Maybe you are not a dottore, no? So we need always to give, so maestro, in Italy is the country where we have more maestros, but not only maestro di musica, but maestro because you teach, maestro because you are almost like a rabbi, maestro, a philosopher, or maestro, or dottore. Ingegnere, a little bit less, but...
I was about to say ingegnere, but in Sicily, I've been called ingegnere.
So, I mean, he's in the rank, but not in the first position is dottore, no? Dottore. So also to call, what you call, primo violino, first violin, professori, when you just call to everybody is professori d'orchestra. And I respect perfectly that professori d'orchestra, professor d'orchestra, but in St. Petersburg, I heard Valery Gergiev called the professori d'orchestra of the Mariinsky Orchestra artist of the orchestra. I was touched by this expression. So I decided, okay, from today on, I will call in Italian artisti dell'orchestra, in Washington artist of the orchestra. I mean, comparing with the country you go, artist dell'orchestra. Because I think it gives them more recognition about all the studies, all the high quality performing skills they have, and they deliver in any concert, preparing themselves, practicing at home. So for me, they are artists. I mean, I also strongly believe that we should be artists in our lives. So to live the life as an artist, that means caring, being curious, experiencing different things, getting deeply inside some arguments, don't take anything for granted. That is the life of the artist. It's a bit recalling the bohème of before. But so I like the idea, artist of the orchestra, but I'm perfectly fine if I hear some colleagues of mine calling professor d'orchestra. I think it's also that very dignified and very appropriate, but I like more artists.
You do something that is unusual that I respect a lot. After a performance, you leave your dressing room door open. And many conductors and singers and so on, I know, want their privacy, and that's okay. And they shut their door, and when they're ready to come out, they come out. But what you do is you leave your door open, and any of the artists of the orchestra, any of the singers who want to come by after the performance to talk to you as you're cleaning up and so on, can do that. And then if you are expecting guests, the guests will come see you. And sometimes, if someone like me who's a friend, you'll say, sit down in that chair, and then people come in and out. If you have any business to conduct, you do that properly, but you always leave your door open. Is that a conscious decision? How did that develop?
I think, I don't know if, of course, it developed in my teenagerhood when when I was in my teenagerhood or even early 20s, still the job, the role of the conductor was still seen as a sort of iconic, mythological detached figure, which I respect. I'm not criticizing that. But when I started to conduct, I liked to be more approachable by everyone who wants to get close to me. So if someone doesn't want, is free not to do it. But if someone wants, I should not put a barrier. So I've always been like that. So I always leave the door open, even when I lead the rehearsals anyway. But we have just talked with the National Symphony Orchestra. I stay in the dressing room at the same level of the stage, where the stage is. And always I have 20 centimeters, the door, not locked, but just open. Not to say completely open, because maybe is a little bit embarrassing, but a little bit. That means if you want, you knock, you come in. You are free to come. I don't keep anyone far. I think it's nice because it changes the idea of the conductor. The conductor is a musician among musicians. Basically is a human being that has to create relationship with other human beings, with other persons. And we have to create relations, because as a conductor, I create relations between the big master to the audience of today. I am the translator, I am the medium. And it's the same way. As a person, I'm just myself. I don't need to put the mask of the conductor when I go to the podium. I don't have to take away when I'm there. I'm simply myself. So I always been like that. So I don't know if developed. Now I'm more conscious. I do that. Now I do on purpose, not because I want to look different, but because I think it's important not to create barriers, but to open the doors.
When I hold conversations like this, usually in front of an audience, but now online, and I hope one day soon in front of audiences again, it's usually my rule not to talk to an artist and ask the artist about other artists, living or dead. But I'm going to make an exception here, and I think you'll understand why. Early in your Met career, you worked a lot with Dmitri Hvorostovsky, who we lost way too soon. I've had him as my guest in a conversation at New York University that is the most viewed of all the conversations I've done there. And I know many artists, colleagues who you and I know, who adored him. And he was not necessarily easy, but he was very emozionato in a Russian kind of way. Would you talk about working with him and about the man you knew? Because we miss him, obviously. The baritone.
I miss him enormously. My debut at the Met, I already mentioned before, was War and Peace by Prokofiev. I had the privilege to have on stage, among other stupendous artists, Dmitri Hvorostovsky. That was the first time we met at the Met. We met at the Met, so just excuse to play with the words. And since that moment, we did together Ballo, we did together Trovatore. And not only that, we found time to see each other out of the music world. We got in contact with our families, with Lucia, with Florence, with his kids. At the time now they are teenagers. And I remember many happy moments with him, and also many difficult ones when I went to visit him in the last part of his life. It's very difficult, sorry, I get emozionato. I have only one regret, not having done more with him. I've done several things. We became friends. The regret is I would have liked to do even more and to experience his artistry even more profoundly. and he's a big loss. But I like to think him in the happy situation. So in my debut at the Met, one of the most challenging, I was very nervous. I was very nervous because I didn't have the possibility to rehearse the orchestra because I took over Maestro Gergiev. I didn't have the possibility to rehearse the chorus. All the rehearsal period and development were made by Maestro Gergiev. So when I conducted, the orchestra didn't know what phase I had. The chorus saw a young conductor moving the hands there. And the fact to have Dima there, that I met before in St. Petersburg. You remember I mentioned that Rigoletto, White Night Festival with Anna Netrebko, her first Gilda, it was my first Rigoletto. Dima was in the audience. And when we were talking and became friends, he remembered perfectly some corners of that performance. And I'm sure he was there because it was absolutely what I remember. So goes back even to that chapter of my life and leading me to the next chapter. And to have him, Anya, to have Samuel Ramey singing Kutuzov. So to be surrounded by that caliber of singers for my debut with that orchestra, with that chorus, with that production, Andrei Konchalovsky, was the best way to step in, to put my foot in the mat. And I'm so grateful having done that with such a great artist as Dima was.
There was something about him
is.
that maybe you can explain, and not just about him, but other singers. Breath control. He had the world-class best breath control. And I've never asked a conductor this. What is it like to conduct with a singer whose breath control is so extraordinary in terms of what you and the singer can do together live, not pre-planning, but live, when he really is so strong?
It gives you, as a conductor, more possibilities. Because most of the time, you make rehearsals with the piano and the singer, so you make some stage orchestra rehearsal. And sometimes you get to the performance and the singer needs extra breath, needs a little bit of help, a little bit of support. It is absolutely unpredictable. You have to react on the moment. But the best surprise is when Dima started the line, after 6 bars, that means a certain period of time, you think now he's going to breath here. I want just to help that. And he didn't do in the rehearsal. And you are preparing that, immediately you see that he's not going to stop. So you were ready at a certain point, just the arm is fluent. Is in that way, is Dima conducting me, is moving my hand. And after that, he can make this phrase that usually takes at least 1 breath, or more normally 2 breaths for other singers. Just I'm not criticizing the others, but I'm just underlying the control Dima had to have this kind of super legato. That is, it was really was a miracle in that kind of things, but also some way of making some portamento. Now we go a little bit too technical, but just to lead from one note to the other with a little bit of portamento, just like a glissando. You know, if you do too slow, becomes like a slow to take off of airplane. So it's not musical. If you do too quick, it's like to have a turbulence in the air. Just to have the normal one that sounds so organic, so natural. We were talking about that organicity, to be organic in the Italian repertoire. Also because with Dima, basically we did Italian repertoire, except War and Peace.
Apart from the tragedy of his dying young, I felt bad for him for only one other thing. He was extremely handsome, and therefore, even though he was a very serious artist and he did very serious repertory, he would do these recitals of these modern Russian song groups that nobody else was doing, and really wonderful, hard songs that he recorded. And people would applaud him between every song. And he would try to ask the audience, please, don't applaud. Let me just sing through the song group and take in the music. And, you know, if he did Italian repertory, they would applaud even more. But and this includes New York City, where we have many Russians who have moved to New York, and they would all come to see him and the other Russian artists. They could not stop applauding. And I asked him about that, and he said, I wish I could tell them to close their eyes. Because he said, I just want them to hear. He said, if I put a bag on my head, the sound won't be good. So I can't put a bag on my head. Mm-hmm. And he wasn't bragging, but he understood that there was that phenomenon that people were drawn to his handsomeness and his charisma. But anyway, I want to proceed to another topic with you, Gianandrea. One that's
tell me.
Very, very, very dear to me. His name is Umberto Giordano. And Umberto Giordano, you were talking before about emozione and how certain music, or I was going to add, certain music just gets you every single time. Not even the words that might be connected to the music, but just the music. And I have it in Verdi and Mozart and Wagner and other people, and Rossini especially, and Berlioz, but somehow the forgotten one is Umberto Giordano. And you and I have spoken about him before. You've conducted his fantastic Andrea Chenier at the Met. It's one of my favorite operas of all. Very undervalued. I think it's a masterpiece. And we've spoken about another opera that Giordano thought was his best opera, Siberia, that made its La Scala debut in 1903. And it had Rosina Storchio as in the role of, I'm forgetting her name all of a sudden, Stefana. And Rosina Storchio's next role was Madame Butterfly, the premiere. Rosina Storchio was a big star, and all the composers competed. She did the Mimi and Leoncavallo's Bohème, and she did Mascagni's Lodoletto. She did many roles, and composers competed to write great roles for Rosina Storchio, most famously Madama Butterfly. And this is a great part, Stefana. And Siberia is, the story is sort of a fantasy. I don't really know what to call it. Luigi Illica, the librettist, created the story somewhat inspired by Russian literature. But if we focus too much on the story, I think we're missing the music. And the reason I bring this up is you are about to do a production of Siberia in Florence with Sonia Yancheva as Stefana. Yep. Talk about this opera, Siberia.
First of all, I I'm with you absolutely in my love for Giordano. I think Andrea Chenier, Fedora, Siberia, but also Madame Saint-Jean are really great operas, very not neglected, but undervaluated. Siberia, it's, of course, the story is not for itself the most, doesn't give the biggest image of the opera, but the combination of story, text, and music makes this opera incredible. I mean, the first act is good. I try to be very, the first act is good. The second act is a masterpiece. The third act is great. So there is also this progression. And the plot starts, let's say, the Vaskrasenie, the Resurrection by Tolstoy, and Memorie da una casa di morte, Memory from that house, from Dostoevsky, are the starting point. So where there is someone has to be rescued, because at the beginning is a courtigiana, Stefana, and through the love, she decides to follow her lovers just sent in Siberia, because he just in a duel make a wound to a prince. So he was just sent there. But there is the first man who took Stefana when she was very young and became just the protector of Stefana. He made money through Stefana. So just using her. And at the end, also this guy gets to the camp in Siberia. So the three characters are there. And the music is very strong, very refined, with a craftsmanship very solid, very well controlled. The storytelling through the music is supreme. It's very compact. There is no indulgence in the music. There is this kind, what I told you, is very urgent. It goes. And when there is all the group of the condemned people going from St. Petersburg or Moscow to Siberia, there is one of these Mahalori, this song, very sad. After that, when Stefana joins them, being aristocrat, I mean, not aristocrat, but living that kind of life, like Manon Lescaut when goes to Paris, it's incredible. There is a sort of resurrection. That's why Resurrection by Tolstoy, following the love instead of the good life. But the most important thing is the way some Russian elements by Giordano are inserted in the story. Have you ever heard the opera that starts with the offstage chorus? This is the opera, the Siberia. So it's just black, and you hear the offstage chorus, 1 minute singing. At the end, the music starts, and we are in this aristocratic palace in St. Petersburg, where the people just play games with the cards, drinking, and already you see just this Stefana is in love with not the protector, but another guy, a young soldier, young ufficiale, and everything starts from there. But there is, most important, the intermezzo at the beginning of the second act. I recorded even as a separate piece with the BBC Philharmonic, and the orchestra loved this music, maybe more than I loved it. So I was just surprised at how they could embrace, understand the idiomatic level of the music. So I think having this possibility to have Sonia Yoncheva and to have as a director Roberto Andò, who is a very famous movie director, but also doing a lot of drama theater, but also he did some opera, will be interesting. I'm waiting already 10 years to do this opera. So now...
Yeah, we've been talking about it for a long time.
You remember, Fred?
Yeah.
And the singers, so the soprano, the Stefana is very important, needs a really dramatic soprano. The tenore is not really dramatic, not the held and tenor by Wagnerian held and tenor, but full voice, less dramatic than Stefana. And Gleby needs to be, let's say, a Verdian baritone, but I mean Iago, Simon Boccanegra, this kind of vocal for the register and for the heaviness of the part.
The original Gleby, by the way, was Giuseppe De Luca, who was a fantastic baritone, and he was the first Johnny Schicchi, he was the first Sharpless, and the first Michonnet in Adriano Lecouvreur.
In Adriano Lecouvreur.
Yeah, a role sung by Ambrogio Maestri very well when you conducted at the Met in a wonderful production a couple of years ago. So this will be in Florence in July, I believe, at the Maggio Musicale. I hope it will in some way be recorded, streamed or something, because I really want to see it, and I'm in New York for the moment. It's too good an opera to be forgotten.
We will.
Good. I'm glad. I will look at it right away. Yeah. Which leads me to your next big assignment, because for a man who's been under lockdown, you're very busy. You are about to become the next general music director of the opera in Zurich. And I've never worked in that theater, but I've been there many, many times, and I know opera in Switzerland, and it's a wonderful city for music. And one of the reasons, and this gets to the core of our next chapter, is Richard Wagner lived in Zurich for many, many years. And he was exiled from Dresden in 1849. And he lived in Zurich from 1849 to 1858. And so much of what we think of as Wagner's achievements either were achieved in Zurich or began in Zurich and were inspired by Zurich. And I know that you, and we're going to talk about this in a moment, are taking on a lot of Wagnerian conducting as your next chapter. And to me, and I haven't said this to you before, there's no better place in the world to do that than Zurich. I think it's better than Bayreuth, because Bayreuth is its own community with its own heritage and so on. And that building in Bayreuth on the Green Hill is a monument to Wagner that he built for himself. Unlike my beloved Verdi, who built rest homes for other musicians, Wagner built a monument to himself. But it was in the Zurich years that all of this fire and creativity and genius came together in remarkable ways. I wrote one thing down. He wrote many of his famous essays and ideas there. Kunst und die Revolution, Art and Revolution, Kunstwerk der Zukunft, Art in the Future, Das Judentum in der Musik, Jewishness in Music, Oper und Drama, Opera and Drama, A Communication to My Friends. He wrote most of the Ring libretto in Zurich. He composed most of Rheingold and Walküre in Zurich. He had the inspiration for and wrote much of Tristan und Isolde in Zurich. And he had this passionate, sentimental, and perhaps more relationship with Matilda Wesendonck, who was the wife of Otto Wesendonck, who basically gave Wagner money for years. And it was a very odd relationship, but then nothing in Wagner is simple. The Wesendonks lived in a hotel, the Bauer du Lac, for 5 years, from 1852 to 1857, if I remember, while building their very famous villa. And when they built the villa, they had a nearby Green Hill. The first Green Hill was not Bayreuth, it was in Zurich. And they had an asile, a little private bungalow or house where Wagner lived and composed and wrote and was inspired by Matilda and was financed by Otto, and his wife Minna was there and not there. And then Cosima, his next wife, was there. And von Bülow, Hans von Bülow, the husband of Cosima, was there. They were all there in this house in just outside the center of Zurich. And it's now a beautiful museum, an art museum, not related to Wagner. But when you move there, I'm going to introduce you to someone I know who's an expert on Wagner in Zurich, and she taught me a lot of this stuff. And it's just fascinating. And when I study Wagner, which I do a lot, I know I'm, filo Italiano, the Italian thread, but Wagnerites know me as a Wagnerite, and I just taught a symposium in San Francisco about it. And I've been to 48 complete Ring cycles, so I can talk the Ring as well, and most of Wagner. But what I forgot about, and then rediscovered in reading my notes for preparing to talk to you, is that Wagner conducted in Zurich Don Giovanni, Die Zauberflöte, Fidelio, Der Freischütz, Norma, and the Zurich premieres of Tannhäuser and Fliegender Holländer. And he did many public lectures and readings. Now, frankly, he did all this to make money, because he really, unlike Verdi, was not a good money manager. And he wasted money, and I'm not going to get into that, but he was not a good money manager. So he always needed money. But he discovered Buddhism in Zurich. He discovered vegetarianism in Zurich. And there's a wonderful vegetarian restaurant in Zurich I'll send you to. It's the oldest vegetarian restaurant in the world. And it's really good. I don't know if you've been there. And so when you go to Zurich, which just seems like a city of banks and swans in the canals, it lives and breathes this Wagnerian influence. And one more thing about him, Wagner lived in sort of the royal city of Dresden, and he rebelled against that. And in Zurich, he was very impressed by the guilds, the unions, the confraternities of artists and so on. And one time in early spring, all the artisans would go down to the square, which is now where the Opera House is, and burn old wood and celebrate. And that became the inspiration for the third act of Meistersinger. So Zurich seems a little bland, a lot of good chocolate too. But when you walk around, it's all there. And then James Joyce later on, who really loved opera. And the city is rich, rich, rich in culture. And the people are very serious about it. Tina Turner lives there. And so therefore, I wanted to ask you in the most general way, as you've conducted Wagner before, I know, but as you are really immersing into Wagner to conduct a new Ring cycle, bravo, and Tristan and Isolde in Zurich. You're starting with Rheingold and then Tristan, I believe, and coming soon, relatively.
Yep.
How are you preparing?
You know, Wagner doesn't come late in my life, because I remember one of my first concerts after I've done Faust Symphony and Prokofiev Symphony No. 5. The following year, I did one program at the end of the season. So we are in 95, 96, 1995, 96. I conducted a Wagnerian program with all extracts from the operas. And the president of the Società Wagneriana di Milano, Wagnerian Society of Milan, gave me a beca, a scholarship to go to Bayreuth that summer. And you know, at that time, you had to queue 4 or 5 years to get a seat there, 1995, 1996. And not only to me, but a scholarship, I could bring another person. I was already married, so Lucia and myself, we went to Bayreuth. So Wagner somehow, to go to this cathedral of the Wagnerism, this Green Hill, this monumentum, this mausoleum, let's say, memorial, but was built by him. It's incredible because every moment you breathe Wagner. I had the same impression in Zurich, I have to tell you. I conducted the Mariinsky Flying Dutchman. I've done again Flying Dutchman in Torino during my years at Teatro Reggio. I did Lohengrin in St. Petersburg. Tristan. By the way, the same production I'm going to do in Zurich, I took to Torino because we just did the same production from Zurich. So I know what to expect. It's fantastic. The Klaus Guth with the Wesendonck atmosphere. You were just Otto, Matilde, and Wagner. Marche, Isolde, Tristan. So when I got the invitation from the intendant of the Opera House in Zurich, okay, we would like to offer you the job of GMD, General Music Director, to offer you a ring. I don't know if you remember, a long time ago, I told you, you know, Fred, probably I will not do 2 things, the Guglielmo Tell and the Ring cycle. That, let's go back 10 years probably. And you told me, no, you have to do one opera. You have to do Guglielmo Tell. And that I've done. There is another opera I will not just mention now that I know I have to do because you told me. But I changed my mind because having been in Zurich 2 years ago, I have done a Fiery Angel production in the theater. I discovered that that city in particular, and that pit, that stage, that opera house that is not big, it's like a boutique opera house, could give me the possibility to do a certain Wagner, or Wagner in a certain way. And knowing all the story that Wagner conceived, all the Ring was conceived there, and all the Rheingold, a 3/4 of the Walküre almost. And after that, there is a break, and he went back. He went back to the later on with Siegfried and Götterdämmerung. I decided, okay, you know, I've always say no, I will not do it, but I do it because an occasion like this will never come back. It's been like 21 years ago when my first visit in Japan. After the first concert, the general manager of one of the Tokyo orchestras came to me to offer me Mahler second. I said, no, it's too early. And overnight, I couldn't sleep. So the next day, I made my agent to call back and to say, you know what? I changed my mind. I will do Mahler 2. Because I said, who will give me Mahler 2 now?
You resurrected the idea.
I resurrected immediately the idea. The resurrection. So I think I accepted for that. And I took big part of this year of the pandemic to dig inside the ring, not only to learn the score, but to get closer to the idea behind. Because there is nothing more far away from Italian mentality than this big mythological, these three worlds, God, humans, and underneath people, and all interacting with this kind of, I would say in Italian, saga nordica, Nordic
sagas.
Yeah. Because we are quicker, as I told you, urgent, and there you need the space, just the beginning of the Rheingold, with this depicting way of the Rhine River, the waves, and it's just great. You have to let yourself disappear in this grandeur and to find your space. So it's been very helpful in the tragedy to have the time to get inside. I started to learn German, and I try really to understand the way Wagner, more than in the Dutchman, more in the Lohengrin, and is closer to Tristan, but still was written Rheingold before Tristan, so is different. How to find the relation of tempo to get a very convincing narrative way to display all the stories, this story. So I learned in this year, because of the situation, to be more patient, because I had to be more patient. But learning the ring gave me more space. I'm less, not less quick. I feel less the feeling of urgency. I allow myself to stay in a long state of ecstasy. So I don't know what will come out from that, but that is my preparation. Is more here and here. Music I can conduct. I can tell you, I can conduct. But to find the nice way to convey this idea, these big paintings, these 4 days with the prologue. So it's a challenge. It's a challenge. I don't know if I will get out as a winner or as a loser, but it is worth it trying.
Definitely. Wagner wrote almost all of Das Rheingold in Zurich, but not all of it. He began writing it in La Spezia, in Italy. And he struggled for a long time to get the sound of the Rhine and the orchestra and so on. And he was sailing from Genova to La Spezia in very rough seas. And he had to be taken out of the boat and brought to a rooming house, to a locanda in La Spezia. And he described the room spinning around and around and his ears echoing. And suddenly the E-flat chord came into his mind. And he pulled himself from the bed and brought himself to a table and began writing out that music that you will start playing. And it really, he's always said that it was Italy that gave him the beginnings of the ring cycle.
This is fantastic. It's even one extra connection, but also not only the idea, because the idea could have been given by this experience he found, but in musical terms, the canon he writes for the horns is just to look to the score without even conducting is a magic. It's just ecstatic. It's incredible, the skill of conducting, just to make true, to become that idea he got true in the music. A canon that becomes even more strict, more closer. All the entrances start like that. After that, it's just miracle. I already used miracle 3 times, but it's a miracle.
When I teach and try to explain the ring cycle to Italians, I ask them to think of it as a family drama. And very specifically to think of Wotan as Simone Boccanegra, as Rigoletto, as the Verdi fathers, even as Philip II in Don Carlo in his resignation. And, you know, he could sing Ella Jemima Mo, She Never Loved Me, about Fricka, about his own wife. I mean, all of these characters are fascinating, but they all knit together. And I often say that it depends on which character you start with, you get a different perspective of the ring cycle. For many, of course, it's Brunhilde. It can be for me too. For a few people, it's Siegfried. It usually is not for me. Occasionally, it's Sieglinde and the love metaphor, and that everything is ultimately about between love and power, that love predominates. And Sieglinde echoes throughout the cycle. We don't meet her in Rheingold, but she's the one who ultimately, it's her music at the very end that's the last expression musically. But then, of course, it could be Wotan, or it's called Der Ring des Nibelungen. It's Alberich. So for many people, Alberich is the character. And what I love, I treat it like a diamond with different facets, that if I turn it and different light goes on the facets, then I see the ring cycle differently. And which is why I can live with it and study it for 50 years. And I'm very, very happy that you're going to be doing this. And so very happy that you're going to be doing it in Zurich, of all places. I would encourage you, I think you've probably been to Lucerne before, but when you go to Lucerne and see where he lived there and thought, but then go walking out where he walked, because the sense of nature that he put into the ring cycle, some of the big rocks and the massives and the forest, is actually Lucerne. And therefore, when you walk among, I remember walking there in all kinds of weather and storms and sun, I would hear all that music in my ears as I walked through the forest where Siegfried encounters the bird.
Yeah, absolutely. That was the idea.
Where Fafner might be. It's all there in that nature in Lucerne. So you're just going to have to spend a few weeks in Lucerne.
I will do it, certainly do it. But you know also what helped, just to make a sort of comma, to add appendix. Also, I encouraged myself to read Manzoni, Promessi Sposi, to read Anna Karenina, Tolstoy, because I needed novels with many characters. Not a story with 4 characters that interact each other, fantastic novels, but some more like not where there is one important, of course, Anna Karenina is the title, but there is also Vronsky, there is Karenin, there is Levin, all these rules, characters. And as you said, if you just look the story from this angle, the story looks different. It helped during this time to read this sort of popular, where the characters are many in some novels, to approach in from this angle, as you said, the ring has been something that I didn't do that on purpose, but I found very inspiring.
Anything, I know you said you've studied already for this past year, anything that you want to share that you've learned that you didn't realize before about either Tristan or the Ring?
About Tristan, I already conducted in Torino, so I have
and one act in New York that with Christine Garcia.
Yeah, I did the second act, the second act at the Lincoln Center with the National Symphony Orchestra. With Tristan, I think many parts are spectacular, but when the music becomes very complicated, I mean, doesn't sound complicated. It shouldn't sound complicated. It's like a fugue in X6 voices by Bach. It's incredibly complex, but it should not sound complex. So that is what I admire in Tristan. For instance, in the last act, after all the big solo, Cor Inglés, Pastorello, the music becomes very thick, very complex. And yet, before getting to the Liebestod, is so, the level of control, of composing control is so high that you don't realize the work, the jewelry work done by Wagner. At the same, I've not done yet, but I've always had difficulties with Siegfried. And actually, learning it is the most symphonic about the four operas of the Ring, the tetralogy. And so if you put more the accent on this symphonic element, everything becomes clearer and clearer. I don't say I will conduct symphonically and the voice, who cares? No, but you have to put a symphonic structure in the opera. And when there is the Siegfried or Death and March Funèbre, or the Wood, when there is the bird, is just incredible. The end when the Wotan, Valkyr Wotan with the fire and the Valhalla. Oh, yeah, you just lose yourself in this great act of creativity. You know, who could dare to conceive Divina Commedia? Who would dare to conceive The Ring? Who could dare to conceive Passion, Matthäus Passion, or the Big Messa in B minor? Who could conceive to, I mean, this kind of, and on this earth, we have had people having this ability, this dream, and the dream became true. So it's a big privilege. I feel like a small child, but I think to get to my teenagerhood, before the time I start to conduct.
Well, listeners know that I always ask my guests to name music that or performances that have inspired them, and Gianandrea's are all wonderful and straightforward. Brahms, 10 intermezzi played by Glenn Gould. Mozart's Don Giovanni, conducted by Carlo Maria Giulini. These are all on Adagio. Verdi's Don Carlo, conducted by Herbert von Karajan, with an older cast. I say older because it's not necessarily the people we hear now. And interesting because of that, Bach's St. Matthew Passion, Harnoncourt. Dvorak, and you picked the right symphony, Symphony number 7. I love the 9th, of course. I'm a New Yorker, and it's, in a way, a very New York symphony. But Raphael Kubelik conducting the 7th is very special. And Tchaikovsky, Symphony number 5. You were talking about the Pathetique before, but why Symphony number 5? But with Evgeny Mravinsky and the Leningrad Philharmonic.
Because I had at home, in my parents' house, a long playing LP. And I had simply the Tchaikovsky Symphony number 5, because they came or together in 2 discs or one by one. Yeah, it happened that I had the number 5. Probably is also emozionato just to remember when I listened the first time the Symphony number 5. And I think the way after the introduction with the clarinets, that orchestra with Mravinsky could express this kind of like a lung. I've never experienced again in that particular symphony. And when I conducted several times, not so often, but several times. I'm desperate, but I cannot get even closer. But the idea is that one. Just the breath, like a singer, no, in a structure of the symphony. So that's why I decided 5 instead of 6. But all the set of 4, 5, 6 with the Leningrad Philharmonic with Mravinsky are all at the top of my list.
So if I were to ask myself, not you, to name the Gianandrea Noseda performance that I least expected, but that absolutely is as good as all these things that you listed here. It might not be the one that you think I'm going to say, although it might be. You conducted an absolutely stupendous Benjamin Britten War Requiem that I heard you do. And I'm getting goosebumps, pelle d'oca, as the Italians say, as I think about it, because it's not that I don't think you can conduct these things. I know you can. But what happened that made that such a fabulous performance? It exists on recording as well. But what happened? Talk about the experience of learning and conducting the Benjamin Britten War Requiem.
I think it was the overall situation. I try to explain very briefly. In that period, that was 2011, in September, I did the world premiere of the contemporary opera, taken from Fratelli Karamazov Brothers, the chapter of the Great Inquisitor opera. So it took a big deal of time to learn it and to do it. Immediately after, practically without having time in between, I did twice the complete cycle of Beethoven's symphonies with Teatro Regio in Torino. And during that beginning of October, it came the invitation to do War Requiem by Britten in Barbican, with London Symphony in Barbican, and to take to New York. Because at the beginning, the project was meant to be conducted by Sir Colin Davis, but he felt himself tired and frail to do such a big work. And so I don't know why, but Catherine McDowell, the general manager of the London Symphony Orchestra, thought about me. I already conducted London Symphony Orchestra, but I don't know why came out the idea connected with the War Requiem. And along with that, if I would have considered the possibility to cover Sir Colin Davis for the Missa Solemnis Beethoven that he had to do in that tour in New York. And at the time, beginning of October, I was not conducting either War and Peace and Missa Solemnis. I've never done before. So two gigantic pieces, if I would have said yes, but of course, you know, War Requiem, great piece. So I said yes, I started to learn as many, you know, with this obsession to get ready. Also because I thought was something that was supposed to be in the hands of Sir Colin Davis. And for the huge respect I had, and I still have, even if he passed away, for this great conductor, I accepted the challenge. And I said, if I do that, I have to do it better I can. I mean, I will always do better I can, but even with this second layer, or first layer even, to do something on behalf of Sir Colin. And the other thing, even to think, to prepare Missa Solemnis just in case in the tour in America, he would not feel himself the strength enough to conduct it. So that was the reason why I studied War Requiem in very short notice. So that's why I told you it was a very, very thick period. Also because coming back from that Missa Solemnis that I didn't conduct in New York, because thanks God, Sir Colin Davis conducted it. It was a great performance, but I was in the audience just in case. I conducted 2 weeks later with the Orchestra of the Age of Enlightenment in London with period instruments. And when I did that, that was mid-November, I started to look and to study Fidelio because I had to do in December in Torino. So I remember those September, October, November, December, those 4 months, like very hectic, a lot of repertoire. But when I learned War Requiem, I discovered the same profoundness of the Verdi Requiem, but with the new element of the British, the English, because the part of the fixed part of the Requiem Mass are sung in Latin, but there are also the interspersed text played by the chamber orchestra, because I have a big orchestra, chamber orchestra, big chorus, children chorus, orgel. So it was a big challenge, but with the experience of the opera, with the voices, with the Verdi Requiem, with the big choral, symphonic choral repertoire, I thought was nice to do it. I did it. And I think it's been also important as a turning point for the next chapter of my activity as a conductor.
I loved it. I think that what's also fascinating about that piece that he wrote to be performed in Coventry Cathedral that had been destroyed in World War II.
Yes.
It included a British singer, a German singer, and a Russian singer. And that tradition has mostly continued, not always, but mostly. And I love Britten's operas. But this, to me, as you said, is right up there with Verdi, but also, as I spoke before about Brahms, the one work by Brahms that I absolutely adore is his German Requiem, which I think is a masterpiece. And it has some of that as well. And certain requiems, all right, without getting personal, but I know singers who are very religious, and I know singers who are not religious. And both have told me that they have no problem or great pleasure singing the Verdi Requiem, the Mozart Requiem, the Berlioz Requiem that I love, the Fauré, all of them, because it's about the music and the emotions. And if someone is a deeply religious person, they experience it differently and they perform it differently. But Britten was not particularly religious. And therefore, the word requiem, in his view, was really about requiem for a civilization, in my opinion, more than a traditional religious requiem. And that to perform it in a cathedral that had been destroyed and to bring together people who had fought on opposite sides in World War II 17 years before has so much significance, but ultimately it's about the music. And I've heard many great British conductors do it and other people, but I'll be truthful and not as your friend. Yours was the best one I ever heard. And so I do want people to find the recording of that. It's there. And I think that, it's hard to ask an artist about his inspiration, but sometimes an artist connects with a piece of music or literature or painting or whatever, theater, in ways that are very, very profound. And I never asked you about it as a friend, but I always felt that there was a particular deep connection there that you had with that War Requiem by Benjamin Britten.
I am a believer, so I also take very seriously the part of the Mass. But what brings tears to my eyes are the part with the two soldiers, the German one and the British one, and especially, you are the guy I killed, my friend. I am the guy who killed you. And they are talking, and by the end, there is this reconciliation that is purely human, but because human is also spiritual. Mm-hmm. I think there is a divine value in the simplest things that we human are dealing with. Being or not believing in God, there is something spiritual that leads and guides us. I think there are moments very dramatic. The Lacrimosa is incredibly touching. There is the Dies Irae is very strong with these 7/4 bars. But those parts where they are the monologues with the two soldiers written with the language, with English language, are very, very, very emotional in the English way.
Yes.
Emotional. But also mi emoziono in doing that. And the fact that apparently the two worlds shouldn't meet or shouldn't live in the same time, that is a proof that the two worlds can live in the same moment and the same level. So it's a gigantic piece, but it's also very intimate because the chamber orchestra. So there is this moment of grandioseness, there is a moment of intimacy, there is the moment of innocence when the children choir sing. And yeah, and there is also the Agnus Dei. I find the part with the tenor particularly well done and very simple. Sometimes simplicity arrives to the heart, even more quicker than very big philosophical. The simplicity gets you very, very easily. And so I still have very good memories of that performance because I remember that when I finished, I thought, oh, it's already over. That means I was completely there. I didn't even realize that it was 75 minutes long. I finished it. Oh, come on, it's gone. It's over. Mm-hmm. That is a good signal. That means I was completely immersed in that.
Yeah. Gianandrea, I always love talking to you and I love seeing you. And I thank you as someone who loves music, but I also thank you as your friend. And I look forward to seeing you in life soon, but before that in Siberia.
Fred, is absolutely, I can say likewise, it's a joy to take advantage of the technology that we have today, at least to have this conversation. And thank you because it didn't have at all a sound of an interview, it was just exchanging of idea experiences. And I really hope sooner rather than later to have the possibility to see you in person.
Okay, ciao.